all delegates should remain conscious of COVID-19 hand sanitizing and contact precautions. All movement, and if necessary, queuing, require 2 meters of physical distancing, and delegates are requested to minimize activity until seated in the meeting room. Introduction of pre-recorded statements will be made by delegations from the national seats. Statements delivered by the representatives who are physically present in the Assembly Hall will also be made from the national seats. With the assistance of the occupational safety and health representatives, the President will oversee the implementation of the mitigating measures in the course of the proceedings. If at any time it appears that the guidelines are not being strictly observed, the President will have no choice but to draw the attention of delegates to these guidelines or even suspend or adjourn the meeting as necessary. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. The General Assembly will continue its high-level meeting of the plenary to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. And now sorry. And now I have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Sabri Bukatoum, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Algeria, to make a statement. He's my friend.
Mr. President, my sincere thanks to you for organizing this high-level plenary meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. President, we strongly believe that the greatest danger to mankind and to the survival of all civilizations remains unless nuclear weapons are totally eliminated. Delegitimizing nuclear weapons is a necessary step to forestall the world from their danger. It was evident that my country joined this path and consciously supported the process of their prohibition. Algeria continues to suffer from the catastrophic consequences on humans and on the environment of the nuclear explosions conducted on its territory during the colonial rule. Algeria was amongst the first signatories of the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I would like, at this occasion, to reiterate our intention to ratify it in the very short coming time. Let's not forget that this treaty was adopted during Algeria's chairmanship of the First Committee in 2017. President, We share the concerns of other non-nuclear states about the limited progress made in meeting the nuclear disarmament obligations, and regarding improvements and development of existing nuclear weapons, which is no less than a violation of the legal obligations on nuclear disarmament. There are no indications that nuclear weapon states, which bear the primary responsibility for achieving nuclear disarmament in accordance with the NPT and the very essence and goals of this organization, have translated into facts the unequivocal undertaking related to nuclear disarmament. Let's not lose the opportunity of the upcoming NPT Review Conference to make progress towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons, the only weapon of mass destruction that are not universally banned. President, we are convinced of the vital importance of the entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty as a core element of the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime. I would like to express the commitment of my country to spare no effort as a co-chair of the 11th Conference on facilitating the entry into force of the CTBT, and seize this opportunity to make a special appeal to all parties to join the CTBT as soon as possible. President, the establishment of nuclear weapon-free zones is not only a measure of confidence, but a real step towards the complete and general elimination of nuclear weapons. The entry into force of the Treaty of Pelindaba, establishing a nuclear weapon-free zone in Africa, shows the African commitments to this goal. We express the hope to see this example followed in other parts of the world, especially in the Middle East. And I do thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Algeria for his statement. And I give
Mr.
the floor.
President,
I have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Dato Seri Hishamuddin Tun Hussein, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia, to make a statement.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, Malaysia expresses its appreciation to you, Mr. President, for convening this high-level meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. Malaysia associates itself with a statement by the non-aligned movement. The General Assembly has been commemorating this day since 2013, and although the COVID-19 pandemic does not permit us to convene in person, Malaysia welcomes the observance of this day to highlight the continued dangers of the existence of nuclear weapons and to encourage and maintain the resolve of the international community towards attaining the long-standing goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. We convened this year on the 75th anniversary of the General Assembly in a situation unprecedented in recent history of humankind. The effects of COVID-19 have revealed the fragility of humanity. And although this devastating pandemic remains the world's biggest current challenge, global geostrategic and security challenges, and the continued existence and threat of use of nuclear weapons hangs over us all. This year further marks the 75th year since the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and 50 years since the entry into force of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Recognizing the need to avoid the potential for death and destruction posed by nuclear weapons, the first resolution of the United Nations General Assembly on the 24th of January 1946 called for the nuclear weapons-free world. Moreover, under Article 6 of the NPT, the nuclear weapon states are legally obliged to pursue good faith negotiations leading to nuclear disarmament. These have yet to happen. For countries in possession of nuclear weapons, they continue to uphold the potential utility of such weapons. The modernization of nuclear arsenals doctrines that permit the use of tactical nuclear weapons, and the development of delivery systems such as cruise and ballistic missiles and hypersonic glide weapons increases tensions, instability, and the risk of use, whether intentional or not. And at the same time, the global disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control architecture is undermined, with arms control agreements being discarded or allowed to lapse. Mr. President, for Malaysia, we are concerned at these developments. Security for all can only be guaranteed by the total elimination of nuclear weapons. International law and the multilateral approaches of disarmament need to be strengthened. And in this respect, I am pleased to announce that Malaysia has recently deposited its instrument of ratification of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We are convinced that the entry into force of the treaty strengthens the global norms against nuclear weapons. It sends a clear message that nuclear weapons are categorically unacceptable and complements the existing international legal instruments relating to nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Mr. President, the NPT remains the cornerstone of the international nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. The NPT and the TPNW can coexist, and the latter gives pathways for nuclear possessing states to become a party. Malaysia reaffirms its commitment to the NPT, and as chair of the Main Committee 1 on Nuclear Disarmament for the 2020 NPT Review Conference, Malaysia hopes that the review conference and its earliest convening at a date to be agreed upon will be successful in bringing state parties together towards achieving the goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. And despite the challenging security environment we face today and the current greatest challenge of the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, we must remain persistent in pursuing nuclear disarmament. The status quo of a world with nuclear weapons is unacceptable and unsustainable. The commemoration of this day reminds us of that. The responsibility is on all of us to realize the objective of a nuclear weapon-free world. The responsibility is on all to make it happen. And on that note, I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Shirley Botchway, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration of Ghana, to make a statement.
President of the 75th UN General Assembly, Your Excellencies, this virtual meeting is yet another bold statement of our unyielding commitment to maintaining international peace and security. May I take this opportunity to congratulate His Excellency, Mr. Volkan Bozkır, on his appointment as the President of the 75th UN General Assembly and for convening this important meeting. We are also deeply indebted to His Excellency, Professor Bande, for his invaluable contribution to the work of the General Assembly. While Ghana endorses the statements of solidarity from the Non-Aligned Movement and the African Group, delivered to commemorate the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, Ghana remains concerned about the current deterioration in the international security environment and alarming developments related to the implementation of nuclear disarmament obligations. We are equally disturbed about the ongoing extensive and expansive plans by the nuclear-possessing states to replace, modernize, and maintain their nuclear arsenal and production facilities as well as capabilities. Recognizing the significance of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the government of Ghana is of the view that a balanced implementation of the obligations under the treaty is critical to ensuring disarmament, non-proliferation, and the peaceful use of nuclear technology. In spite of our inability to hold the 2020 NPT Review Conference due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we must use the time available to us to engage in further consultations ahead of the 2021 conference, which will enable us to sustain the momentum required for a successful review process. Our preparations should culminate in the identification of substantive proposals that would facilitate the adoption of a comprehensive and balanced outcome document in 2021. I wish to assure you that Ghana will work assiduously with all states towards the desired outcome. As this year marks the 50th anniversary of the coming into force of the treaty and the 25th anniversary of its indefinite extension, we have an opportunity to bequeath the world with another robust and befitting document, which will capture our collective aspirations for a nuclear-free world. Mr. President, Ghana urges all stakeholders, particularly nuclear weapon states, to honor their disarmament obligations for the collective security of all states. The prudent legal pathway towards eliminating nuclear weapons remains the ratification and implementation of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons adopted in 2017. I am happy to note that Ghana was among the first countries to sign this important treaty when it was opened for signature. We therefore call on states that are yet to sign the treaty to do so at the earliest possible date. We must all be mindful of the cost to human life and the environment from the irresponsible use of nuclear technology. We cannot afford to lose sight of the fact that in the event of a major infraction of our commitments, there will be no victors or losers. As we are all aware, our only guarantee in successfully averting any far-reaching havoc is the total elimination of nuclear weapons. Mr. President, Ghana supports the Secretary General in the quest to make issues of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation a priority issue for the United Nations. We reiterate the call for international support towards the implementation of the critical components outlined in this agenda. To conclude, I urge member states to remain resolute in pursuing a nuclear-free world by upholding multilateralism and international cooperation, as this is the key to keeping our world safe for the present and future generations. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration of Ghana for her statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Karen Longaric Rodriguez, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Plurinational State of Bolivia, to make a statement.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen. Since the inception of our organization, one of its main objectives has been to curtail weapons and to achieve nuclear disarmament. These are key aspects in order to maintain international peace and security. Over the years, we have made significant progress towards complete nuclear disarmament, and yet, despite the commitment of many countries, including Bolivia, there are still some 14,000 nuclear weapons in the world, and they constitute a threat and latent danger for all of humanity. Nuclear disarmament and the complete elimination of nuclear weapons are the only way to guarantee against the use or the threat of use of these weapons. Bolivia is a state that promotes peace and cooperation amongst peoples of the region and the world. We are fully committed to the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter, and we promote nuclear disarmament as well as the complete elimination of all weapons of mass destruction. We are party to international legal instruments for the control of nuclear weapons. At the regional level, in 1968, we acceded to the Treaty for the ban of all nuclear weapons in Latin America and the Caribbean, a treaty also known as the Tlatelolco Treaty. This is an international agreement which established the first nuclear-free zone. At the universal level, in 1972, we signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, as well as the CTBT, for complete ban of testing of all nuclear weapons, and 2018, we acceded to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and we were one of the 25 first states to ratify it in 2019. As a member state of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Bolivia has also committed to using nuclear facilities and material exclusively for peaceful purposes. We are aware that it is the significant legal, binding, and universal progress geared to achieving nuclear disarmament is not enough. It's not enough to establish nuclear-free zones, nor is it enough for member states to voluntarily renounce nuclear weapons programs or to remove all nuclear weapons from their territories. In the United Nations' 75 years of existence, we have not yet been able to eliminate the concern due to the existence of nuclear weapons, which are used by some states as elements of deterrence. This is why it is vital importance to continue creating appropriate mechanisms to achieve nuclear disarmament. Celebrating the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons is an opportunity that can be leveraged in order to raise awareness among states and the international community about the threat of this kind of weapon. From this important forum, Bolivia urges all member states to promote nuclear disarmament in all of its aspects, because it is the only way for us to guarantee peace and security for our whole planet. Thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the plurinational state of Bolivia for her statement. And now I have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mohammad Jawad Zarif, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran, to make a statement.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, 75 years after the United States dropped atomic bombs on innocent civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the first and only use of such horrific weapons, this meeting provides a unique opportunity to mobilize the world to liberate humanity from the nuclear nightmare. 25 years after the NPT Review and Extension Conference called for reduced reliance on nuclear weapons, and the International Court of Justice ordered good faith efforts towards nuclear disarmament, the United States is developing new nuclear weapons and recklessly lowering the threshold of their deployment. It has further caused immense damage to the NPT by unlawfully withdrawing from the INF and the JCPOA. Additionally, the world's lone perpetrator of a nuclear attack extends blind support to the sole possessor of nuclear arsenal in our region, an outlaw regime that has openly threatened others with nuclear annihilation, all while crying wolf about proliferation. The international community must compel Israel, which has aggression in its very DNA, to promptly accede to the NPT and destroy its nuclear arsenal. And given its 6 decades of deception and clandestine development of nuclear weapons, Israel must be compelled to submit to the most intrusive inspection regime that law-abiding members of the NPT observe. We also call on the General Assembly to declare as a binding norm of international law that nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. This should be followed by a long overdue concrete program for time-bound nuclear disarmament and provision of security assurances to non-nuclear weapon states in the interim. Dear friends, last year, $72.9 billion was spent on nuclear weapons, half of it by the United States alone. This is higher than the GDP of most countries. Just imagine if the billions wasted on instruments of global annihilation were allocated to help fund the fight against COVID-19. Enough is enough. I thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Teodoro Locsin, Jr., Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, to make a statement.
Mr. President, a year after the United Nations founding in 1945, the General Assembly, in its very first resolution, identified nuclear disarmament as a leading goal of the UN. 75 years later, that goal is still a distant dream. To be sure, there was a powerful argument for nuclear arms as the surest way to keep the peace between two superpowers, both armed to the teeth with nukes. If they hadn't been mutually so armed, it was anybody's guess if peace in Europe, after the unspeakable horrors of two world wars, would hold between them. One stretching from the Pacific to Berlin with the largest land army in history, and the other stretching from sea to shining sea, an ocean away from Europe, but just hours away by missiles and bombers. But that's over with the Cold War, although each side has enough nukes left to wipe out the other and the rest of mankind. But even as all that was going on, both sides understood the risk of error and loss of control. They settled for sporadic nuclear disarmament within an arms control architecture that yet continues to dismantle faster than it is built up. Existing agreements are being terminated. Others are imperiled. It's like the old deterrent of mutual assured destruction, with nostalgia for the no-surprises stability of the Cold War, except terrorism is trying to join the nuclear club, and it is madness personified. Now comes a pandemic, unstitching the fabric of social safety and order across the globe. The pandemic continues with no end in sight. Terrorists most likely think that a dystopian world left by unchecked pandemic is what home should feel like. Dirty, dusty, nasty, brutish, short, and lights up in the dark without the benefit of electricity. We face a pandemic that has millions dying and whose end is nowhere in sight. And there is still the looming existential threat of a nuclear war promising human extinction in toto or in very large swaths. The two are not that different. They both threaten the existence of humanity and civilization, such as it is, not much, but better than the alternative. The difference, though, is not small, but hugely significant. The pandemic is not of our doing. Nuclear annihilation might happen accidentally, but that it happened will be entirely our fault, like leaving several loaded revolvers in a kid's playroom. In his address before the General Assembly, my president committed to the ratification of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The Philippines was among the first to sign the treaty, and we will adhere to its universalization of global norms against nuclear weapons. The International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons was declared to reaffirm commitment to the goal of nuclear disarmament. But it is also to educate the public outside the UN about the whys of disarmament and generate the support. To my President, it is quite simple, really. No aspiration or ambition can justify the use of weapons that destroy indiscriminately and completely. These weapons of death put us all at mortal risk, especially if they fall in the hands of terrorists without a shred of humanity in their souls. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Emery Brown, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign and CARICOM Affairs of Trinidad and Tobago, to make a statement.
Mr. President, it is an honor to address this high-level plenary meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. We thank you for convening this meeting and raising awareness about the threat posed to humanity by nuclear weapons. The world last saw the use of nuclear weapons 75 years ago, which resulted in consequences so catastrophic that our existence as a species would be threatened should they ever be used again. In recognition of this, Trinidad and Tobago maintains that the use of nuclear weapons constitutes a crime against humanity and a violation of international law. We are convinced that it is only through the total elimination of nuclear weapons that international peace and security can be guaranteed. Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago has demonstrated a long-standing commitment to the global non-proliferation regime. We are proud to belong to a region which established the first nuclear weapons-free zone via the Treaty of Tlatelolco. We have demonstrated unwavering fidelity to global non-proliferation by our ratification of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the treaty banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere, and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Trinidad and Tobago was also pleased last year to join the growing list of member states that have signed and ratified the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. As we look forward to the entry into force of this agreement, we continue to encourage states which have not yet done so to sign and ratify the treaty. Mr. President, as we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, it is regrettable that the international community still grapples with the challenge of the elimination of nuclear weapons. It has been 50 years since the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty entered into force, and the international community is still unable to undertake negotiations in good faith on nuclear disarmament. As a global community, if we are to prevent the repeat of some of the darkest events in history, there's an urgent need for collective responsibility and consensus. In closing, Trinidad and Tobago reiterates our call for the denuclearization of all regions of the globe. We encourage members of the international community to undertake negotiations on nuclear disarmament in good faith and to work toward creating a world free of nuclear weapons. I thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs of Trinidad and Tobago for his statement. And now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guatemala to introduce a statement by the Minister.
Señora Vicepresidenta.
Madam Vice Chair, Excellencies, colleagues, it is my honor in this very important meeting to celebrate the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons to introduce the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Pedro Brolo Villa, who will be speaking on behalf of the Guatemalan government. The modern international scenario is not just complex, but today's world is before polarization of world ideas, imposition of ideas, and a break of trust between people and their governments. In many cases, peaceful trust is broken and human rights are violated, and there's a fight for spheres of influence and domination. In my capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Guatemala, I'd like to indicate that the day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons is a reminder that only the very existence of these weapons is a threat to mankind's existence. And this has been felt for generations. Given the fact that we are getting closer to the next review conference for the NPT, it's important for the international community to be clear that it will not be satisfied with a simple reiteration of commitments already undertaken in previous conferences. And the terms cannot continue to be postponed indefinitely. We have countries that possess nuclear weapons, and they need to fulfill their commitments under the treatment and remove nuclear weapons as part of their security and defense policies, and to cease and desist in seeking to improve their weapons qualitatively or develop new types of these weapons. Along with climate change, the threat of a nuclear debacle is one of the main risks for life on this planet. Given these deplorable circumstances, important to recognize that 25 years ago, 50 countries signed the United Nations Charter with a promise to improve life for coming generations and to save them from the scourge of war, which twice has been inflicted on humanity, decimating our peoples. Guatemala reiterates its position with regard to complete nuclear disarmament, which would be irreversible and transparent, and it condemns any type of nuclear testing or threat of the use of force with these weapons, which then jeopardizes the very continuity of life on Earth. In this spirit, my country is now in the final phases of ratifying the Treaty on the Complete Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Once it comes into force, it will complement other instruments in this area in the international arena to eliminate all nuclear weapons. And this is clearly the desire of most states in order to achieve the common goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. 75 years after the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 75 years since two events which confirmed to the entire world that these weapons should never have existed. We are of the firm conviction that the time has come to move to action and clearly define how we are going to achieve that objective. Thank you.
I thank the Foreign Minister of Guatemala for his statement, and I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Nandukumar Buddha, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration and International Trade of Mauritius, to make a statement.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today we commemorate the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. On this occasion, Mauritius solemnly reaffirms its position to continue supporting the cause against nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are a threat to mankind. We have, so far, successfully managed to contain it. We pray that the horrors of 1945 and victims of nuclear testing do not occur again. Bold initiatives of world leaders over the past decades have contributed in preventing the outright use of nuclear weapons. One outstanding achievement of the United Nations is the adoption of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Signed by more than 190 states, the NPT is in fact the cornerstone of the UN disarmament edifice. It has successfully contributed in preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons and weapon technology. It has also ensured cooperation among states for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. Another important instrument is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This treaty requires state parties to pursue negotiations on nuclear disarmament in good faith. It sustains the commitment of the international community to uphold the disarmament agenda. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Mauritius has always been governed by the rule of law. We have consistently supported efforts and initiatives for a nuclear-free world. Shortly after independence, Mauritius ratified the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1969. Mauritius was in fact the first African country to ratify the African Nuclear Weapons Free Zone Treaty that was on the 22nd April 1996. We remain adamant that there should be complete global disarmament. Prime Minister Pravin Jagannath has repeatedly expressed his firm commitment to a nuclear-free world. In July 2017 and again in 2019, Mauritius voted in favor of the resolution calling for the signature and ratification of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are all wrestling to achieve the targets of Agenda 2030. Our world is more exposed to the devastating effects of natural calamities and pandemics, and we cannot afford the tragedy of a nuclear confrontation. Let us get our act together. Let us do all to prevent the occurrence of another nuclear incident, and let us build a better world for generations to come. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Regional Integration and International Trade of Mauritius for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Evariste Bartolo, Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Malta, to make a statement.
Mr. President, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we gather today in the United Nations General Assembly to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, I am pleased to share with you that my country, Malta, has on August 24th signed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and subsequently ratified the treaty on the 21st of September. Malta has taken this political decision to clearly signal that it is in favor of the total elimination of nuclear weapons and that it shares the view of many other countries which, like it, believe that the total elimination of nuclear weapons remains the only absolute guarantee against their use. The signature of this treaty underscores as such Malta's unwavering commitment towards nuclear non-proliferation and highlights our commitment towards achieving prosperity through peace. Mr. President, Malta believes that the continued efforts of the international community on non-proliferation and disarmament affairs should be aimed at achieving a world free from nuclear weapons. In its foreign policy, Malta has for long maintained a special focus on furthering dialogue, peace, stability, and prosperity in our own region and beyond. Malta remains of the view that the security of Europe is intertwined with regional peace and security. It is true that Malta today remains concerned by the lack of adherence to obligations under Chapter 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty by some states, the demise of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, INF, and the setbacks faced by the JCPOA. As such, today Malta calls upon all parties concerned to redouble their efforts so they may focus on the benefits that effective nuclear diplomacy would render to all and one concerned. To this end, Malta pursues the universalization of this treaty, the International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards, agreements, and protocols, and the early entrance into force of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Mr. President, this year we commemorated the 75th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which took place on the 6th and 9th August 1945, respectively. The two atomic bombs killed around 200,000 people and affected millions of others, most of whom were civilians. It is thus of utmost importance to continue to reflect on this grim reminder of pain and destruction that has forever marked world history and to take time to remember those who perished, as well as the hibakusha, the atomic bomb survivors. We must also strengthen our resolve in ensuring that such a tragedy does not repeat itself, and thus continue our call for disarmament and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Mr. President, as today's occasion to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, Malta again calls upon all UN member states for the urgent need that our planet becomes free from nuclear weapons, as their presence constitutes an existential threat to global peace, security, and the survival of our own species, mankind. Needless to say, no state, big or small, would be immune to the unimaginable catastrophic effects caused by the deployment of nuclear weapons. As no state would be immune to the radioactive fallout, climate disruptions, or mass displacement, we must all redouble our efforts to convince more and more countries that the total elimination of nuclear weapons is the way to go. I thank you all for your attention.
I thank the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Malta for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Adalisa Albertina Xavier Rees-Magno, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Timor-Leste, to make a statement.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me begin by expressing our sincere appreciation to His Excellency Ambassador Volkan Bozkir, the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, for convening the high-level meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. As both a small island developing states and a least developed country, Timor-Leste shares the common concern regarding the threat of weapons of mass destruction. For this reason, since the restoration of our independence 18 years ago, Timor-Leste has been consistent in supporting the total elimination of nuclear weapons. The Constitution of Timor-Leste enshrines the principle of the peaceful settlement of conflicts, and Timor-Leste support all efforts on conflict prevention and sustaining peace, as well as the active promotion of peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, which we believe are fundamental to international peace and security. Our Constitution also refers to the underlying principle of friendly relations between states and cooperation towards the general, simultaneous, and controlled disarmament. Timor-Leste has been demonstrating its commitment in supporting international collective mechanisms to address security threats through supporting the United Nations conventions concerning security matters, namely the Chemical Weapon Convention and the Biological and Toxin Weapons Conventions. With a year following the restoration of our independence in May 2002, Timor-Leste ratified the NPT, and my country also signatory of the CTBT. The government of Timor-Leste also supports the convening of the review conference of the NPT, as referred under Article 8, Paragraph 3 of the treaty, and looks forward to participating in the discussion next year. Timor-Leste supports the adoption of the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 2017 and signed it in 2018. Timor-Leste is currently in the process to conclude the internal procedures for the ratification of the treaty. Timor-Leste has also put a lot of effort to demonstrate its commitment at the national level to the control of the use of small arms by establishing national legislation regulating and restricting their use to the National Police and Defense Force institution of Timor-Leste. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, today is a momentous day for us because the commemoration of International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons happens at the same time that we, the United Nations, are also celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations in a world that has managed to avoid a third world war. As we reaffirm our commitment to multilateralism and join in collective action to combat the COVID-19 global pandemic and the effects of climate change that are also a threat to our very existence, we urge all member states to also join together all our collective efforts to ensure the realization of a world that is safer, secure, and free from nuclear weapons, to preserve the existence of humanity and ensure that future generations can live in peace and harmony. Thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Timor-Leste for her statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Matsipo Ramakoe, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Relations of Lesotho, to make a statement.
Mr. President, allow me to commend you for convening this high-level meeting to commemorate the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. Today's meeting is a clear demonstration of our resolve to ensure that necessary measures are taken towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons. September 2020 marked the 3rd anniversary of the opening of signature for the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the commemoration of the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. On the 6th June 2020, Lesotho ratified the TPNW, becoming the 3rd SADC country after South Africa and Namibia, and Botswana followed suit. It is indeed gratifying to note the steady increase in the number of signatories to this treaty. Mr. President, the objective to maintain international peace and security and to achieve a world without nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction is the raison d'etre for the formation of the United Nations. Sadly, the threat of the use of these weapons continues, constituting a distinct and proximate danger to global peace and security. Therefore, the total elimination of nuclear weapons remains the only absolute and viable panacea against their use or threat of use. Mr. President, we are concerned of the slow pace in adhering to the objectives and obligations of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. A pillar in the pursuit for nuclear disarmament has not attained universality 50 years since its adoption. This is the only legal regime for preventing the spread of nuclear weapons technology, promoting cooperation in the peace use of nuclear energy, and achieving nuclear disarmament. We hope the 10th NPT review conference to be held in New York in 2021 will provide the opportunity for all member states to build consensus and work in earnest to achieve the NPT objectives. Moreover, it has long been accepted that credibility of the NPT will depend on the effective implementation of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. However, there is still no international ban on nuclear weapons testing as the CTBT scrambles to garner requisite number of ratifications for its entry into force. Meanwhile, nuclear weapon states continue investing heavily in nuclear weapons technology. This raises concern that the risk of nuclear use is increasing and the legal obligation for non-proliferation and disarmament are being undermined. Thus, action on our part as member states is called for. As I conclude, Mr. President, allow me to reiterate Lesotho's support for all UN resolutions on arms control and disarmament particularly on the establishment of nuclear weapons-free zone. It is this spirit that I wish to reaffirm my country's commitment to the Treaty of Pelindaba, which paved the way for the African continent to be a nuclear weapons-free zone. Finally, I wish to call on the entire international community to fast-track the implementation of the NPT and wish to also reiterate the need for speedy entry into force of the TPNW to ensure that humanity lives in peace without fear of extinction. I thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Relations of Lesotho for her statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ali Coulibaly, Minister des Affaires étrangères of Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you.
Monsieur Volk.
Your Excellency, Mr. Volkan Bozkır, President of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Your Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, honourable delegates. President, at the outset I wish to extend to you my warm congratulations on your outstanding election to preside over the 75th session of the UN General Assembly. I also wish you every success in the accomplishment of this great role. I'd also like to extend my most cordial greetings to the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres. His determined and ongoing commitment for a world free of nuclear weapons knows no limits. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Côte d'Ivoire welcomes the holding of this important meeting to celebrate the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. The commemoration of this day is particularly important this year because we're also marking the 75 years of the United Nations itself. And one of the major priorities of the UN is to build a world without nuclear weapons. While we have seen substantial reductions in nuclear weapons deployed since the Second World War, in recent years we have unfortunately seen erosion in some nuclear disarmament mechanisms, as well as a stalemate in discussions on these issues due to geostrategic interests of the key players. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic, which has required the mobilization of substantial physical, material and financial resources, means that the international community is more determined to achieve the goal of a total elimination of nuclear weapons. Finally, our collective efforts to find solutions that would prevent a new use of nuclear weapons are hindered by the ongoing doctrine of a nuclear deterrent, as well as the deadlock of talks on the North Korean and Iranian nuclear programs, as well as the multiplication of laboratory nuclear tests. Committed as we are to the international non-proliferation architecture, Côte d'Ivoire, in December 2019, ratified the Convention on Early Notification of a Nuclear Accident and the Convention on Assistance in the case of a nuclear accident or radiological emergency. These were signed on the 26th of September 1986. President, ladies and gentlemen, Côte d'Ivoire believes that the total elimination of nuclear weapons is the only guarantee that these arsenals are not used or ever threatened to be used. It is therefore vital to raise our voices and pool our efforts to thus prevent nuclear proliferation in all its forms. This will require collective work to ensure that the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty can enter into force. This treaty, for more than 2 decades now, has not been ratified by enough states. My country also remains convinced that the growing number of nuclear weapons-free zones, as well as the signing of the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty, will be a further gauge of security for the planet as a whole. Additionally, we call for confidence building amongst nuclear weapon states so that negotiations can swiftly resume on North Korea. It is just as important also to preserve the Iranian nuclear deal, which has demonstrated, and sufficiently so, its effectiveness, both for regional and international security. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Côte d'Ivoire for his statement, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia to introduce a statement by the Minister.
شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you, President. I have the honor on this global day that we are commemorating today, the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. I have the honor to introduce the statement of the Foreign Affairs Minister of Saudi Arabia, His Excellency Mr. Faisal bin Faham Al Saud. Thank you very much. In the name of God the Merciful and All Compassionate, Your Majesties, Excellencies, Secretary General of the United Nations, President of the General Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace of God be with you. Based on the objectives of the UN Charter, which insists on maintenance of international peace and security and the prevention and elimination of the threats to peace, today we are commemorating the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. I would like to thank you for presiding over today's meeting. This underscores our commitment to peace and stability. President, ladies and gentlemen, this day reminds us that we should all be aware of the danger posed by nuclear weapons for humanity and the threat that it poses for the world as a whole. We would like to take this opportunity to underscore that it is necessary to totally eliminate these weapons in order to achieve the goal that we have set ourselves, in order to have a world free from nuclear weapons. President, my country's policy, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, in terms of non-proliferation, is based on our commitment to the UN Charter, to international law, and our international commitments, including the instruments that we have signed up to, which we are committed to implementing in a transparent and just fashion. We are committed to the Vienna Convention on the Humanitarian Consequences of Nuclear Weapons to contribute to eliminating the risks of nuclear storage for the world as a whole. My country would also like to underscore the importance of conventions and treaties on international level which call for the elimination of all nuclear weapons, and we underscore the importance for negotiating their update too. My country also adheres to the non-aligned movements and the Arab group state. President, we insist on respecting the pillars of the NPT, disarmament, non-proliferation, and a peaceful uses of nuclear energy. The international community must wage a common front against any countries who seek to acquire nuclear weapons, particularly those who, through hostile acts, are seeking to undermine international peace and security through funding illegal terrorist militias and providing weapons and ammunition to them. My country urges the international community to shoulder its responsibilities as regards the violations by Iran of international conventions and agreements, particularly the JCPOA, which, in my country's view, does not dissuade Iran from its nuclear ambitions. enriched uranium stocks are currently 10 times higher than the limit provided for in the agreement, according to the IAEA. My country is committed to the objectives of the UN Charter for maintaining international peace and security for the peoples around the world. Thus, we were one of the leading countries in the Middle East to live in peace, and we live in a zone now free from nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction. At the same time, my country regrets the inaction of the international community as regards its commitments to the establishment of a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East, and also the NPT review from 2010. We would take this opportunity to call on Israel, the only country in the Middle East that has not yet acceded to the treaty, to do so swiftly and to put all its nuclear facilities under the IAEA safeguards regime. This would contribute to maintaining peace and security, as well as protection and stability for all peoples in the region. In this connection, we welcome the GA resolution to task the Secretary-General to convene an international conference for an agreement to build in the Middle East a zone free from nuclear weapons. And we call on parties to participate in the second session of this conference. We'd also like to welcome Jordan and thank them for the excellent chairmanship of the last session of this conference, and we express our full support to Kuwait, who will preside over the second session. President, my country shares the intention of the international community of the 10th NPT Review Conference, which was planned for January 2021. We will spare no effort to ensure that this work be successful. We also express our full support to the president of the next conference so that we can achieve an outcome document that reflects the aspirations of all countries. In conclusion, we would express the wish that we should, hand in hand, in order to spread international peace and security and achieve a world from the threat of nuclear weapons, and so all peoples are able then to live in peace and security.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hanana Ould Sidi, Minister of National Defense of Mauritania, to make a statement.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبيه الكريم.
Peace on the Prophet. Mr. President, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, very early on, my country, Mauritania, became aware of the danger of proliferation of nuclear weapons, which then translated into our accession to all legal instruments relating to the peaceful use of nuclear energy. My country also developed a rigorous national plan to promote nuclear safety and developed a national strategy to identify radioactive sources and any other materials that might be used for nefarious purposes. Ultimately, this year, subsequent date, my country will be honored to sign the fourth national framework with the IAEA for the period 2020 to 2024. In so doing, my country will be increasing its contribution to international efforts geared to promoting the international program for nuclear safety. In this regard, we would also underscore our efforts undertaken by the IAEA to implement the ENSSP plan from 2012. That then allowed us to develop our vision of this subject matter and developed a more transparent and safer national plan, a surer national plan as well. Mauritania was one of 122 countries that voted in favor of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons of 2017, a treaty which was a sizable contribution to working towards our common goal, which is to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. It was undeniably a historical step because elimination of these deadly weapons would take us closer to a better world. Thank you.
I thank the Minister of National Defense of Mauritania for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kagoso Jean-Claude, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Cooperation and Congolese Abroad of Congo, to make a statement.
President of the General Assembly, United Nations Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The commemoration on the 26th of September every year of the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons is of particular importance at a time when the UN is also marking the 75th anniversary of its own founding. This, alas, is also coinciding with the 75 years since the atomic bomb was used for the first time on civilians. The first use of this atomic bomb, and when we mention this, we remember we have terrible memories that come back from that. Unutterable sufferance and great trauma that civilians fell victim to in Hiroshima and in Nagasaki. Nagasaki and Hiroshima were indeed the theatre for a humanitarian and environmental disaster that was unprecedented, as well as major material damage. These unutterable horrors must encourage us to move away from this murderous folly that was produced by the use of weapons of mass destruction. On this solemn day, I wish to welcome the convening of this meeting and to express the shared will of all the international community, who, through its first resolution on disarmament, decided to work and to work together to build a world without nuclear weapons. In a world where many needs are still to be met, it seems to us almost insane to continue to develop nuclear arsenals just to satisfy the irrepressible ego and vanity of the all-powerful. President, for our part, Congo who is party to international instruments on disarmament, particularly the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the cornerstone of the non-proliferation regime. The Republic of Congo only supports the use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes and for the well-being of the people around the world. So, in the same vein that Congo acceded to the Pelindaba Treaty, adopted by the African Union in 1996. This marks Africa as a zone free from nuclear weapons. The Republic of the Congo here reaffirms the need to create a zone free from nuclear weapons in the Middle East, and we call for the convening of an international conference on this very concerning topic. President, every day that goes by, we ask ourselves these fundamental questions on the survival of humanity. Given the ongoing updating and fine-tuning and multiplication of nuclear technologies that are just as deadly as each other. For my country, the production and use of these weapons is quite simply an aberration. This is why my country's government is tirelessly advocating for the dismantling of all nuclear arsenals, while we also reiterate too from this august assembly that global nuclear disarmament is necessary. And at the same time, my country's government is also urging all UN member states to respect their commitments and to maintain constructive dialogue so that we can once and for all spare humankind from nuclear holocaust. This is a essential moral duty that we have before future generations. Thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Cooperation and Congolese Abroad of Congo for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Krishna Kumari Martura, Minister of Defense of Suriname, to make a statement.
Your Excellency Volkan Bozkır, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, Ministers, and Permanent Representatives, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, the efforts of the international community in favor of promoting international peace and security make it essential to have a strong multilateral mechanism in the United Nations in the field of disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful use of nuclear energy. Full and fireable nuclear disarmament is of importance to all states, regardless of their size or military or economic status. Simply put, the implications of nuclear catastrophe are troubling to all states because of the capacity for global annihilation that the arsenals of nuclear weapons represent. We remain convinced that it is only through the total elimination of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction that international peace and security can be guaranteed. Mr. President, the Republic of Suriname recognizes that nuclear weapons are intrinsically dangerous and posing an unparalleled threat to the very existence of humanity. Therefore, my country has committed itself to the non-proliferation of these weapons of mass destruction by ratifying relevant international and regional treaties, namely the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Chemical Weapons Convention, the Biological Weapons Convention, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, and the Treaty of Tlatelolco. The proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace is testimony of our recognition of the multifaceted approach to ensure the long-term development of our continent and people. I am pleased to note that existing differences between countries in this part of the world are being resolved through the use of existing consultation mechanisms and security treaty provisions and through the use of diplomatic channels. The Treaty of Tlatelolco has proven to be an effective instrument to monitor and maintain Latin America and the Caribbean free from nuclear threats. Mr. President, since the adoption of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540, Suriname has endeavored to strengthen both legislative and practical implementation measures to ensure adherence to the non-proliferation objectives of the resolution. With the assistance of the United Nations Regional Center for Peace, Disarmament, and Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, and the efforts of the different national stakeholders, Suriname has presented a voluntary national action plan to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540 Committee. This National Action Plan was drafted both as a demonstration of the country's commitment and with the intention of charting a way forward for further implementation, strengthening initiatives. It is equally important to refer to the valuable assistance of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons in drafting national legislation for the Chemical Weapons Convention, which is under consideration by the National Assembly. Referring to the implementation of the Biological Weapons Convention, I can inform this August meeting that my country currently is in the process of drafting national legislation in that regard. With the assistance of the United Nations Regional Center for Peace, Disarmament, and Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, a workshop is planned on measures to advance towards a national legislation against biological and toxin weapons in the context of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540. In closing, Mr. President, Suriname shares the common concerns about the dangers that the so-called weapons of mass destruction can cause. In this respect, international support and intentions which could prevent new forms of civilian suffering and casualties caused by the use of these weapons are fully encouraged. Therefore, the Republic of Suriname supports the aspect of creating nuclear weapon-free zones, but more specifically and especially a nuclear weapons-free world. Promoting and maintaining security and as such enabling development is a national responsibility and duty of all, the government and the citizens. I thank you.
I thank the Minister of Defense of Suriname for her statement, and I have now the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jacoba A.S. Oliva Tendra Zaravillo, the Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs of Madagascar to make a statement.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President of the 75th United Nations General Assembly, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to take part in this high-level meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. First, may I express the full solidarity of the President of the Republic, of the government, and the people of Madagascar towards all nations who are currently in mourning due to the coronavirus pandemic. The 75th anniversary of our organization coincides with the memory of the end of the atrocities of the Second World War, but it is also a celebration of peace and of life. Indeed, the United Nations peoples chose in 1946 to build together. They chose to build a world of peace, security, and prosperity for future generations. And whereas the recollection of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is fading for some, we are invited, like each year, to recall the extreme horror inflicted by the use of this kind of weapon. It's a weapon that makes no distinction between civilians and combatants, and which goes against the very principles, the fundamental principles of humanitarian international law. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 75 years after the founding of our organization, the goals set forth in the very first resolution of the General Assembly are far from being achieved. These goals called for the elimination of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction, and they called for the use of atomic energy for purely peaceful purposes. According to current data of the United Nations, some 13,400 nuclear weapons continue to exist in the world, and the countries that possess such weapons have financed long-term plans to modernize them. Madagascar joined those countries which believe in a world freed of these kinds of weapons by adhering to and acceding to the treaty making Africa a nuclear-free zone and the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Given the many threats to peace and security in the world, Madagascar calls for a bolstering of multilateralism and overturning of the trend of states resorting to unilateral solutions, which runs counter to the spirit of a collective system of security put in place by the United Nations. The quest for a world free of nuclear weapons takes us down a very long road, but it is a road worth taking to protect ourselves from the humanitarian horrors of the use of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Madagascar for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Karen Egelberger, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Justice and Culture of Liechtenstein, to make a statement.
Mr. President, almost 75 years ago, in its very first resolution, the General Assembly committed itself to the elimination of nuclear weapons. It did so as the world only began to understand the unspeakable suffering brought about by the nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Today, we know that these horrors are not merely distant incidents in the history of humankind. They are felt to this day and will forever be engraved in the lives of the survivors and their families. Yet, nuclear weapons continue to threaten the very existence of humanity, maybe more so today than in a long time, as they fuel increasing global instability. Those who possess them mistake them as the ultimate insurance that their interests and security will be protected. Those who aspire to possess them fall for the same fallacy. The perceived strategic security of some is in fact the permanent insecurity of all. Nuclear weapons are not only an existential threat, they are also an inherent challenge to the rule of law. The most fundamental humanitarian norms leave no space for the most destructive and indiscriminate weapons of all. Our highest legal authority, the International Court of Justice, has advised states to that effect. The Non-Proliferation Treaty charted a course to eliminate nuclear weapons, making it legal to acquire them. Its lack of implementation is read by some as an incentive to do the opposite. Liechtenstein strongly supports the collective effort to outlaw nuclear weapons and is committed to ratifying the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The treaty provides the adequate legal framework for nuclear disarmament. Eliminating nuclear weapons is not a policy choice. It is a legal and moral necessity and a dictate of public conscience. The world needs to see urgent progress in ongoing disarmament negotiations. Today, Liechtenstein fully stands by the historic call of the General Assembly, repeated countless times since, to free the world of nuclear weapons. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Justice and Culture of Liechtenstein for her statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Maldives, to make a statement.
Mr. President, I would like to convey my appreciation to you for convening this important meeting, and to the Secretary General for his unwavering commitment towards achieving the goal of the total elimination of nuclear weapons. The annual commemoration of the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons is a stark reminder of the imminent threat to humanity posed by nuclear weapons and the pressing need to find common solutions. 75 years ago, in the show of unprecedented multilateral cooperation, the world came together with a noble aspiration to eliminate nuclear arsenals and weapons of mass destruction. That it was the subject of the very first resolution of this organization demonstrates the importance attached to this issue. We all know too well that failure carries a heavy price. We are also aware the catastrophic consequences of the use of even one single atomic bomb. Yet today, the world is in possession of 15,000 nuclear weapons. As long as these dangerous weapons exist, so too will the risk of its proliferation and use. When it comes to our common goal of nuclear disarmament, we cannot be complacent, nor lag behind. We must remember that every effort towards nuclear disarmament is a step towards strengthening international peace and security. It would foster greater economic development and enable more prosperity. Mr. President, the Maldives is not a producer of any weapons, nor do we have any aspirations to do so in the future. We are among the original signatories to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. We have remained unwavering in our efforts to strengthen the global architecture on international peace and security. Last year, the government of Maldives ratified the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and acceded to the Convention on Cluster Munitions and the UN Arms Trade Treaty. We believe these instruments are critical for the nuclear non-proliferation legal framework. We urge those states that have not ratified the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons to do so as soon as possible, so that it may enter into force. We welcome the convening of the first session of the Conference on the Establishment of a Middle East Zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, according to the General Assembly Decision 73/546. The Maldives firmly believes that security and strength is not achieved through weapons, but through investment in the well-being of our people and our environment. We improve our welfare by reducing poverty, investing in sustainable development, guaranteeing fundamental human rights, strengthening democratic processes, and increasing our resilience to the impacts of climate change. Disarmament is essential if we are to have peace and security and inclusive societies, as envisaged in Goal 16 of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Maldives for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Pradeep Kumar Giwali, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nepal, to make a statement.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. At the outset, I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for convening this event to commemorate the International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We are living in unprecedented times. The COVID-19 pandemic has caused disruption in lives, livelihoods, and economies. However, the pandemic has taught us an important lesson that human lives are more precious than anything else. In 9 months, we have lost over 1 million lives to the pandemic, but we can lose more lives within a wink of an eye in case of a nuclear explosion, whether accidental or intentional. The scientific race for vaccines has kept our hope alive to win the war against this virus. But no vaccine would save us from the nuclear catastrophe. Death, destruction, and the devastation would be much more severe, inhuman, and indiscriminate, both for the present and future generations. Despite this, it is ironic that huge amount is spent on nuclear weapons every year, which is much higher than official development assistance to the neediest and poorest countries. It is time to reflect on where our investments should be, on nuclear weapons or poverty reduction, on eternal annihilation or environmental conservation. Answer to these questions is plain and simple. We need to focus on the security and well-being of our people and humanity at large. The dividend of disarmament should be diverted to achieving SDGs. A small fraction of the cost of armament could save millions from hunger and disease and can supply safe drinking water and basic health services. More diplomatic efforts can be devoted to the protection of environment, trade promotion, and economic development if we all abide by nuclear disarmament regimes, including NPT, CTBT, and TPNW. To conclude, Mr. President, I reaffirm Nepal's principled position that universal peace and security can only be ensured through a time-bound, general, and complete disarmament of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction. Nepal believes that the peaceful use of nuclear energy and the complete disarmament of nuclear weapons are two sides of the same coin. Nuclear technology should be harnessed for the peaceful purposes of promoting healthcare, increasing agricultural productivity, and saving lives. The world will never be a safer place as long as specter of nuclear weapons looms large. Thank you.
Doy las gracias.
I'd like to thank His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nepal, for that statement. And I now give the floor to the distinguished Mr. Paul Oquist Kelly, Minister and Private Secretary for National Policies for Nicaragua. Mr. President, it's a pleasure for us to be part of this high-level meeting for the 7th consecutive year to commemorate on the 26th of September of the International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We would associate ourselves with a statement made by the distinguished permanent representative of Indonesia on behalf of the non-aligned movement countries. The world today is facing the simultaneous consequences of the COVID pandemic, the Great Depression of 2020, the Second Cold War, and the arms race of the 21st century. The arms race of the 21st century is increasing military spending, mobilization of nuclear weapons and delivery systems, the threat of weapons in space, and the fall of the multilateral system and elimination of weapons. And it's unjustifiable and unacceptable that in this current situation we would continue spending more and more to modernize and test all types of these weapons, and less is spent on promoting life, cooperation, and solidarity as needed in order to overcome the challenges of this pandemic and the challenges of the resulting economic depression due to lockdowns and other measures. Worldwide defense spending in 2019 was over $1.7 trillion, the greatest amount since the Cold War and the greatest amount on a yearly basis spent in over a decade. That would be $1.9 trillion, to repeat that. Nuclear testing and testing of delivery systems has increased in increasing strategy with regard to these weapons. Some of these weapons were prohibited in treaties, and these treaties came into force in 1947, but now we have a new millenary arms race with a new sword of Damocles hanging over the heads of mankind. The only way to prevent the use or the threat of use of weapons of mass destruction and non-proliferation of these weapons is the complete and absolute elimination of all nuclear weapons. Actually, the solution of all of these problems is to stop nuclear weapons. And this is also set forth in Article 6 in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons of 1960, and the NPT, as well as the CTBT, which was adopted in 2017, and the treaty which, for the first time, prohibits the use or the threat of use of nuclear weapons, which was adopted in 2017, and that would also include nuclear testing. Nicaragua has already ratified that treaty, and the fourth NPT and Article 6, and sees in that a definitive solution to the issues as long as there's social and political will to create the necessary conditions for that to happen. And today we urge ratification of the Treaty on the Total Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons from 2017, and we will continue to prepare otherwise we'll be continuing to prepare ourselves for a nuclear weapons war, which will bring the end of all humanity on the planet. The cost of an arms race in the 21st century will reduce the financial oxygen needed by climate change and sustainable development goals, and as needed by the recovery of the pandemic and preparation for a possible second pandemic and the Great Depression of 2020 from which we need to recover, Mr. President.
Doy las gracias.
I thank the Minister and Private Secretary for National Policies of Nicaragua for that statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Abdulatif bin Rashid Al Sayani, Minister of Foreign Affairs for Bahrain, so that he can make his statement. You have the floor, sir.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate, Your Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır, President of the General Assembly, Your Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me at the outset to extend Bahrain's appreciation to the UN for the tremendous efforts to maintain international peace, security, and stability. We commend the constructive role of UN agencies and organs in different fields, providing support to countries around the world to implement their programs and plans. Mr. President, we reaffirm that the Kingdom of Bahrain will continue implementing its firm policy, which supports the elimination of weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery. We will strengthen our cooperation with the international community and relevant parties to curb the proliferation of such weapons. The Kingdom of Bahrain believes in the important strategic role of the United Nations and its specialized agencies as they help member states in benefiting from the peaceful use of nuclear energy, especially in the health, education, and environmental sectors, as well as in clean energy. This is a vital part of the 2030 Agenda and SDGs. The United Nations can also play a role in providing technical training and capacity building. The Kingdom of Bahrain joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, and the Convention on Nuclear Safety. We also ratified an agreement with the IAEA to implement safeguards as part of the NPT and its protocol. We have implemented these conventions at the national level. We call upon the international community to provide the necessary support to achieve the objectives of such conventions and establish a world free of nuclear weapons. We stress our support of the inalienable right of states to benefit from the different peaceful uses of nuclear energy in line with international law and the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Non-Proliferation Treaty is the legal basis of the IAEA safeguards regime. We stress the need for promoting the exchange of knowledge and nuclear technologies between industrial and developing countries on equal footing. All nuclear facilities and programs must be subjected to the IAEA Comprehensive Safeguards regime to maintain international peace and security. The Kingdom of Bahrain shares the concern of the IAEA regarding the violation by the Islamic Republic of Iran of the enriched uranium ceiling permitted in the nuclear agreement of 2015 between the 5+1 and Iran. We called upon the Islamic Republic of Iran to cooperate with the IAEA in full transparency and subject all its nuclear facilities and activities to the IAEA. We called upon the Islamic Republic of Iran to meet its obligations and implement nuclear safety and security guarantees. This would reassure Arab countries on the other side of the Arabian Gulf, which shared genuine concerns about the peaceful nature of the Iranian nuclear program and the operation of Abu Shar reactor. There is a need to ensure that this reactor meets all nuclear safety requirements to prevent any incident leading to disastrous environment and humanitarian consequences in the region. We stress the need to implement the 1995 Security Council resolution on ridding the Middle East, especially the Arabian Gulf, of weapons of mass destruction and nuclear weapons. More than ever, the Arabian Gulf needs to establish a WMD and nuclear weapon-free zone because of its strategic importance. Once again, we call upon the international community to adopt a unified global strategy to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction through an effective mechanism to eliminate such weapons regionally and internationally, especially in the Middle East. Mr. President, the Kingdom of Bahrain commends all nuclear disarmament efforts. We reaffirm the need for collective work to overcome one of the biggest challenges facing humanity, to achieve peace and security and create a world free of nuclear weapons. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you.
Doy las gracias.
I would like to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bahrain for that statement. And now give the floor to His Excellency Mukhtar Dlurburdi, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, to make a statement.
Dear Mr. President, dear Secretary General, distinguished colleagues, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Kazakhstan commends President of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Volkan Bozkir, for organizing this event and NAM for its unshaken stand on its founding objective of disarmament. This year, during the landmark 75th anniversary of the UN, the pandemic COVID-19 has clearly exposed, among other crises that loom ahead of us, continuing vulnerabilities in nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. Last week, my President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev reiterated the bold and unwavering vision of my country to achieve nuclear weapon-free world. Our historic memorable decision to close the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site and renounce the world's fourth largest nuclear arsenal is well known, as recorded at the latest observance of International Day Against Nuclear Tests just a month ago on 26 August. Kazakhstan has the moral right to be always at the forefront of international efforts, as it is among the few countries that still suffer from nuclear tests. In this regard, to facilitate recovery from devastation caused, we invite all member states to support and sponsor the recurring resolution on international cooperation and coordination of efforts aimed at the rehabilitation, the environment restoration, and economic development of the Semipalatinsk region in Kazakhstan. This resolution will be proposed for adoption by UN General Assembly this year. Due to the lack of progress in disarmament, we also need to accelerate momentum for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons to become a new reality and for the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty to enter into force. Kazakhstan was the first country to set the example of popular movement to halt nuclear tests around the world. The wider engagement of youth holds new possibilities for the future, especially to ensure the success of forthcoming NPT review conference in 2021 and mark the 50th anniversary of the NPT. In this perilous time of geopolitical tensions and the catastrophe caused by COVID-19, disarmament by all nuclear weapon states should be the priority of international relations policy. International solidarity is no longer a choice, but an obligation. It's obvious that our already depleted resources, further diminished by COVID-19, should instead be spent on global public health, climate mitigation, and sustainable development. To conclude, we need to redouble our efforts and join our synergies with unfaltering determination to free humanity from the threat of nuclear weapons by 2045, the 100th anniversary of the United Nations. That is what our first president, Yelbasi Nursultan Nazarbayev, has called for. There is no other pressing global goal today. Thank you.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan for that statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kagiso Musi, Minister of Defense, Justice and Security for Botswana. He will now make a statement.
Mr. President, honorable ministers, your excellencies, heads of missions and international organizations, distinguished delegates. On behalf of the delegation of the Republic of Botswana, it is my pleasure and privilege to address this high-level meeting to commemorate and promote International Day of the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. By adopting United Nations General Assembly Resolution 6832 of 5th December 2013 as United Nations member states, we reaffirmed our commitment to the ultimate goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. This development is testimony of our determination dating back to 1946, when the first resolution was adopted to address the issue of achieving global nuclear disarmament. In 1978, the first special session of the General Assembly devoted to disarmament made an important decision that nuclear disarmament should be at the top of the United Nations disarmament agenda. This commemoration therefore provides the international community an opportunity to take stock and reflect on our achievement and challenges thereof on this very important matter. Botswana has over the years demonstrated commitment to nuclear disarmament by being party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, International Atomic Energy Agency Safeguards Additional Protocol to Safeguards Agreement, Treaty to Pelindaba, and lately ratified the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, just to mention a few. In furtherance to the aforementioned, we recently enacted the Nuclear Weapons Prohibition Act 2018 to provide for the domestication of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Botswana has consistently supported all the United Nations General Assembly resolutions on nuclear disarmament and other efforts to promote international peace and security. Mr. President, Botswana supports the peaceful research and development of nuclear energy of peaceful purposes in accordance with provisions of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. As provided in Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, all countries should promote and cooperate in the peaceful exploitation of nuclear energy. while at the same time working towards complete nuclear disarmament. We believe that the pursuit of developing nuclear energy should be within the framework and protocols of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Mr. President, it is our firm belief that nuclear weapons pose an existential threat to humankind. In this regard, it is incumbent upon all of us to tirelessly pursue a nuclear disarmament agenda that speaks to a world free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. We recall the 3 conferences on the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons that took place in Oslo, Norway, March 2013, Nayarit, Mexico, February 2014, and Vienna, Austria, December 2014. At these events, sufficient scientific evidence was produced that brought to the fore the likely devastating effects the world would suffer in the event of a nuclear weapons detonation, whether by accident, miscalculation, or design. We were also cautioned that as a collective, we did not possess adequate resources to properly deal with such a disaster. We often hear of efforts by some nuclear weapon states to modify, modernize, and upgrade their nuclear arsenals with a view to achieve more destructive power that far exceeds the devastation that occurred in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In this regard, we call on the United Nations disarmament machinery, non-state actors, and member states to continue their relentless pursuit for nuclear disarmament and the total elimination of these weapons and all other weapons of mass destruction. Mr. President, future generations must inherit a peaceful international peace and security environment, free of nuclear weapons and all other weapons of mass destruction. I therefore wish to conclude by reiterating Botswana's position that the only way to ensure that nuclear weapons are never used is through their total elimination. We welcome renewed efforts and determination by all stakeholders in furtherance of this disarmament objective. I thank you.
I'd like to thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Security of Botswana for that statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hugh Todd, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation from Guyana, to make a statement.
Excellencies, as we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, the need and urgency expressed decades ago remain as urgent today, since it is our firm belief that nuclear disarmament would encourage and promote global peace and stability. Nuclear weapons are the most dangerous weapons made by mankind. They pose an existential threat to the entire human race and, by extension, planet Earth. In this regard, it was an explicit expression that the first resolution adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1946 sought to institute arrangements that could eventually lead to the, and I quote, elimination from national armaments of atomic weapons and of all other weapons adaptable to mass destruction, end of quote. Decades later, the record of achievements falls short of the commitments made. Guyana applauds the many initiatives, including legal measures developed to make the world nuclear weapons free. In particular, Guyana recognizes the adoption of the Treaty on the Total Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was an accomplishment not only for this organization, but for the world as a whole. Guyana was honored on September 20th, 2017, to be the first country to sign and ratify the treaty, a testimony of our commitment. Notably, we face a more uncertain future. Spending on nuclear weapons and armaments continue to rise and is of much concern, since it appears that political will necessary to drive the process is severely lacking. The existence of the threat of or use of nuclear weapons is not only a source of continuing global unease, but the production, possession, and or modernization of such weapons also deprive the world of invaluable resources which can be meaningfully invested in peace initiatives, especially as we embark on the decade of action and delivery for sustainable development. Excellencies, Guyana commits to a policy of advocacy for the total elimination of nuclear weapons, and we urge all member states, industrialized, emerging, and developing economies to join us in advancing these objectives by quickly ratifying the Total Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons Treaty. The early entry into force of the treaty will give strength to international norms and standards regarding the total elimination of nuclear weapons. We have a moral duty and commitment to rid the world of nuclear weapons. Latin America and the Caribbean continues to be a leader in this regard, in keeping with the commitments of the Treaty of Trilego. For its part, Ghana will continue to actively support these efforts and will join hands while traversing the path to peace through disarmament. I thank you.
Doy las gracias al ministro.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jose Mbanda Kabangu, Minister of Scientific Research and Technological Innovation of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to make a statement.
President, I welcome the convening of this meeting to commemorate the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, as well as the message of the Secretary-General, who reiterates his commitment for disarmament and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. Indeed, 2020 sees the 50th anniversary of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which itself is the cornerstone of the global disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation regimes. When faced with the humanitarian consequences of an explosion or use of these weapons around the world, I support an absolute guarantee against this, and I believe that only the total elimination and assurance that this will never happen again will guarantee this. In doing so, we'll be able to respond to one of the goals of our organisation on general and complete disarmament to achieve a world free from nuclear weapons. As part of this, the DRC, my country, has always supported this objective, and through its accession to the NPT, as well as the Pelindaba Treaty, which made Africa a zone free from nuclear weapons. My country's commitment is also demonstrated by its policy for disarmament, non-proliferation and arms control, as well as respect to international obligations, particularly the signature of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons on the 20th September 2017. My country warmly welcomed the adoption on the 7th of July 2017 of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is a legally binding weapon. A legally binding instrument, and is particularly welcome given the absence of will on the part of nuclear weapons states to implement measures and actions on nuclear disarmament. Indeed, the DRC, my country, has reaffirmed its tireless commitment to peace and international peace and security in signing this instrument, and it strengthens the NPT. And I encourage all peace-loving and committed countries to preserve this treaty and to accede thereto. In addition to this, the implementation of commitments for disarmament will allow us to allocate further resources to sustainable development and international cooperation and prevention efforts so that we can address humanitarian emergencies in particular. Also, recent experience have shown that COVID-19, climate change, as well as nuclear weapons, pose a real danger. In the same way, as it was difficult for us to prevent COVID-19 from entering into our countries, this would be the same would be true to prevent the consequences of a nuclear explosion, whether it be deliberate or accidental. President, management of COVID-19 has demonstrated that we share one single planet and that we are all vulnerable. No one is safe if the world is not safe. Collective security requires we renounce the proliferation of nucleation and move towards disarmament. Thank you very much.
Doy las gracias al ministro.
I thank the Minister of Scientific Research and Technological Innovation of the Democratic Republic of Congo, for that statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Sultan bin Said Al Muraki, Minister of State for Qatar, to make a statement.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate, Mr. President, we reiterate the State of Qatar's support for your great mission. We appreciate your valuable efforts to ensure the success of this session in these circumstances. Mr. President, the ongoing international debate on the risks of nuclear proliferation underscores the importance that the international community attaches to the elimination of the threat of nuclear weapons to international peace and security. International efforts have continued since the adoption of the first GA resolution on disarmament, the outcome document of the first special session of the General Assembly for Disarmament, and the 1968 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nuclear disarmament has become a non-negotiable international legal obligation. Despite these efforts, the international community still aspires to achieve the desired goals of that treaty and subsequent international instruments. The world is unable to define a specific time frame for nuclear disarmament and implement Article 6 of the treaty as a result of the insistence on possessing nuclear weapons. Accordingly, the State of Qatar reaffirms the need to strictly and completely commit to all pledges of international instruments on nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation. We consider human interests that human interests lies in the absence of weapons of mass destruction. Mr. President, the Middle East faces increasing and different challenges. This requires concerted efforts to diffuse crises and find solutions to existing tensions. In light of the dangers of the proliferation of nuclear weapons in our region, which needs peace and stability, there is an urgent need to rid the Middle East from nuclear weapons, as confirmed by GA resolutions, including the resolution on the Indefinite Extension Conference and the review of the NPT of 1995, according to which establishing a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East is the main pillar of the indefinite extension of the NPT, and in line with the resolutions of the 2010 conference and other relevant resolutions. The State of Qatar renews its support for the holding of the second session of the UN Conference on establishing a zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East by 2021. We look forward to cooperating with all countries of the region to achieve this goal, to serve our people, and to enhance international peace and security. Mr. President, we stress the need for implementing legal obligations of international agreements on nuclear disarmament. It is important to develop peaceful nuclear energy programs responsibly in cooperation with the IAEA in order to ensure the highest standards of safety and security in a world where nuclear proliferation is a source of great concern to everyone. In conclusion, the State of Qatar renews its commitment to continue working with the international community to ensure the total elimination of nuclear weapons and achieve security and stability in the world, as well as to serve all humanity. Thank you.
I thank the Minister of State of Qatar for his statement. And I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Sheikh Omar Faye, Minister of Defence of Gambia, for a statement. You have the floor.
Delivered by Honorable Sheikh Omar Faye, Minister of Defence, on behalf of His Excellency Mr. Adama Barrow, President of the Republic of the Gambia, at the high-level plenary meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons. New York, 2nd October 2020. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished delegates, my delegation welcomes this unique opportunity to address this august assembly on the threat that proliferation of nuclear weapons poses to our world and the urgent need to demonstrate our commitment to their total elimination. As a state party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the Gambia remains firmly committed to fulfilling its obligations under the treaty. We call on the international community to intensify its efforts towards convincing nuclear weapon states not to abandon their commitments, especially as they concern non-proliferation and nuclear disarmament. Mr. President, the Gambia endorsed several IAEA protocols, which include Pelindaba Additional Protocol and Small Quantity Protocol in 1978, 1996, 2010, and 2011 respectively, and these impose on us obligations, including the need to meet certain reporting obligations to the IAEA as well. Following a request by the government of the Gambia, a team of IAEA experts in radiation safety and nuclear security visited the Gambia from 9th to 11th January 2012 to conduct advisory mission to evaluate the current status of legislative and regulatory infrastructure for regulatory control of radiation sources of the Republic of the Gambia and provide guidance in the areas where deficiencies were identified. This was followed by another visit in 2014 to assist in developing the Integrated Nuclear Security Support Plan. As a responsible member of the international community, the government of the Gambia ratified the Statute of IAEA on 28 October 2016, making the country a full-fledged member of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. We are fully committed to the promotion of the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. We call on member states to renew their commitment to nuclear safety and non-proliferation around the world. Mr. President, although the Gambia currently has no nuclear power or research reactor facilities, but there are multiple sources of radiation which are a detriment to human health and the environment. By far, the most significant source of radiation exposure to the public is from medical procedures such as X-ray, nuclear medicine, and radiation therapy. Quite a number of people are also exposed to radiation from consumer products such as tobacco, building materials, combustible fuels, security scanners, and laboratory equipment. The Code of Conduct on the Safety and Security of Radioactive Sources is a non-binding instrument which requires the parties to support and adhere to. The Code of Conduct is a useful guiding instrument in which the Gambia is ready to fully support and accede to, as it will be essential during the development of our nuclear and radiation laws in the future. Mr. President, through our national focal point, while being guided by the IAEA in line with its statute, the Gambia shall establish the following: a regulatory body within clear responsibilities and functions on nuclear safety and security. In this connection, a nuclear security unit has been established by the National Environment Agency, NEA, in close collaboration with relevant stakeholders in the realm of nuclear technology. Developed a national nuclear law which will set out the constitutional, statutory, and regulatory framework of nuclear safety and security in the country. enforce monitoring of borders on the control of imports of nuclear and radioactive materials to combat illicit trade of radioactive materials. The Gambia IAEA unit, with its partners and relevant stakeholders, has embarked on numerous sensitization activities over the years to raise awareness about nuclear safety and security. Mr. President, in conclusion, as we celebrate this auspicious day, we are reminded of the threat that nuclear weapons pose to humanity, as well as to our collective security in the world that is becoming dangerous by the day. The government of the Gambia commit itself to increasing steadily through the years the budgetary allocation of the International Atomic Energy Agency and supporting their technical and institutional capacity building for sustainable development of our shared planet. We must renew our commitment and redouble our efforts towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons, as well as the strengthening of the non-proliferation regime. I thank you all for your kind attention.
I would like to thank His Excellency, the Minister of Gambia, for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Felipe Sola, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Argentina, who will now make a statement. The International Day for the Complete Elimination of Nuclear Weapons is an opportunity to reaffirm our conviction that the total elimination of these weapons is the only guarantee against their possible use. This year as well, we recall 75 years since the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, whereby the world was able to bear witness to the horror of the use of these nuclear weapons. For Argentina, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, continues to be the cornerstone of the disarmament regime. The upcoming review conference, which will be chaired by our country, will serve to stress the importance of defending the balance between obligations and rights of states parties. Today, after more than 50 years, we believe that that balance continues to be important. Implementation of Article 6 of the NPT by the signatory parties who possess nuclear weapons is still pending. Neither the holding of negotiations in good faith on measures for the cessation of the nuclear arms race, which is at an upcoming date, nor the Treaty on General Disarmament will include the participation of nuclear weapons states. Argentina called attention to the fact that these states are absent during the negotiation of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That is, this is a very serious problem where those who are the owners of the problem are absent. More, we regret the fact that the progress in the area of disarmament has not been achieved, and in fact what we've seen is losing ground rather than making progress for ballistic disarmament agreements. For our country, the entry into force of the Complete Test Ban Treaty is a clear and urgent need. Implementation of unilateral moratoria by nuclear weapons states could confirm the fact that this is the best treaty and also that it is a jus cogens norm in international law, which should be completed with the implementation of the treaty, which would then have the capacity to continue being in force and which would provide oversight and monitoring, which is vital in order to implement the CTBT. The various tests undertaken, nuclear tests undertaken by the DPRK over the last decade are very serious because there has been a sustained increase in power with each test. The universalization and rapid entry into force of the CTBT is thus a necessity in order to achieve general, verifiable, and complete nuclear disarmament for the Korean Peninsula. Argentina is a good example of a program of peaceful use of nuclear energy. Working with Brazil, we transformed what could have been an arms race into a space of cooperation and confidence building, which has brought stability and security to the entire region. Latin America has historically been on the cutting edge of disarmament and non-proliferation, including with the entry into before the entry into force of the NPT. The region's contribution to peace and security, regionally and globally, with the entry into force of the Tlatelolco Treaty in 1967 was real and effective. And once again, we call on nuclear weapons states to revisit their interpretation and statements to the protocols of the treaty that urge to not violate the statutes of the region as a nuclear-free zone. Finally, we are aware that international public opinion requires proposals that are concrete with regard to irreversible, verifiable, and transparent disarmament. Argentina shares that view. Any delay in honoring obligations to a world free of nuclear weapons will not lead to the disappearance of the commitment. On the contrary, it reaffirms the need for raising our voice in outcry. Thank you.
Doy las gracias al ministro.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Argentina for that statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Aras Azimov, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Azerbaijan, who will be speaking on behalf of the non-aligned movement. He will now make a statement.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of 120 member states of the non-aligned movement at the high-level meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. At the outset, we would like to express our appreciation to the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır, for convening this meeting, and to the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his participation. Mr. President, the non-aligned movement welcomes the commemoration of 26 September as the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, designated through the United Nations General Assembly Resolution number 68/32. The movement considers the annual observance of this International Day as one of the effective ways to draw the attention of the international public on dangers of nuclear weapons, the necessity for their total elimination, and the advantages of nuclear disarmament for development, as well as for international peace and security. Nuclear disarmament historically has been the highest priority for the movement, and we reiterate our concern over the threat to humanity posed by the continued existence of nuclear weapons and their possible use or threat of use. In this regard, we emphasize that the convening of the United Nations High-Level International Conference on Nuclear Disarmament, as mandated by the General Assembly resolutions, would provide an important opportunity to review progress made in nuclear disarmament and to further promote this noble objective. Mr. President, during the 18th Summit of the Non-Aligned Movement, held in October 2019 in Baku, Republic of Azerbaijan, the heads of state and government of the movement stressed that progress in nuclear disarmament and nuclear non-proliferation in all its aspects is essential to strengthening international peace and security. They also stressed the importance of ensuring that efforts aimed at nuclear non-proliferation are parallel to the efforts aimed at nuclear disarmament. Mr. President, as long as nuclear weapons exist, the risk of their use or threat of use, as well as their proliferation, persists. Any use of nuclear weapons is a violation of the Charter of the United Nations, and considering the catastrophic humanitarian consequences, the only and absolute guarantee against the use of nuclear weapons is their total elimination. The slow progress towards nuclear disarmament and the nuclear weapon states' lack of progress to accomplish the total elimination of their nuclear arsenals in accordance with their relevant multilateral legal obligations remain to be issues of deep concern to the non-aligned movement. We reaffirm the need for the nuclear weapon states that bear the primary responsibility for nuclear disarmament to take urgent and concrete actions aimed at achieving this goal. The non-aligned movement further reiterates with concern that improvements in existing nuclear weapons and the development of new types of nuclear weapons, as provided for in the military doctrines of some nuclear weapon states, including the United States Nuclear Posture Review, violate their legal obligations on nuclear disarmament, as well as the commitments made to diminish the role of nuclear weapons in their military and security policies and contravene the negative security assurances provided by the nuclear weapon states. The movement stresses once again that these improvements, as well as the development of new types of such weapons, violate also the commitments undertaken at the time of the conclusion of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty and at the NPT Review Conference by the nuclear weapon states. Mr. President, it is time to take a new and comprehensive approach on nuclear disarmament. The international community is waiting for the realization of the goal of the total elimination of nuclear weapons. There is an urgent need to make concrete and systematic progress towards this end. The non-aligned movement welcomes the convening of the first session of the Conference on the Establishment of a Middle East Zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, according to the General Assembly Decision number 73/546, held from 18th November to 22nd November of 2019 at United Nations headquarters in New York, and adoption of a political declaration and its final report. Member states of the movement look forward to the second session of the conference and continue to call upon all states of the region, without exception, to actively participate in this conference and negotiate in good faith and bring to a conclusion a legally binding treaty on the establishment of the zone. The movement also stresses that the resolution on the Middle East adopted by the 1995 Review and Extension Conference of the parties to the NPT, as well as other relevant decisions on the subject adopted within the context of the review conferences, remain valid until the objective of the establishment of a zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East is achieved, and that the implementation of decision number 73/446 is without prejudice to the validity of aforesaid resolution and decisions, and shall not also be construed as their replacement. At the same time, the non-aligned movement states parties to the NPT continue to express deep concern over long delay in the implementation of the resolution on the Middle East adopted at the 1995 NPT Review and Extension Conference, calling for establishment of a new nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East, and strongly urge the UN Secretary General and 3 co-sponsors of this resolution and to fully implement it without further delay, considering that the indefinite extension of the NPT is inextricably linked to the implementation of this resolution. Mr. President, being a staunch proponent of multilateral diplomacy, the non-aligned movement reiterates its determination to promote multilateralism as the core principle of negotiations in the field of disarmament and non-proliferation. The movement took note of the adoption of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons on 7th July 2017 at the United Nations Conference to negotiate a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. It is hoped that when entered into force, the treaty would contribute to furthering the objective of the total elimination of nuclear weapons. The member states of the movement reaffirmed the importance of the Conference on Disarmament as the single multilateral negotiating body on disarmament and call for the urgent commencement of negotiations therein on further effective nuclear disarmament measures to achieve the total elimination of nuclear weapons, including in particular on a comprehensive convention on nuclear weapons. We further call for urgent compliance with legal obligations and the fulfillment of the commitments undertaken on nuclear disarmament. Mr. President, to conclude, the non-aligned movement welcomes the UN meetings and activities for the commemoration of the International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons on 26 September, and we appreciate the participation of all delegations in this important event. We invite member states, the UN system and the civil society, including non-governmental organizations, academia, parliamentarians, the mass media and individuals to commemorate and promote the International Day for the total elimination of nuclear weapons through all means of educational and public awareness-raising activities. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan, who spoke on behalf of the non-aligned movement countries. I thank him for that statement. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Erika Muñoz, Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs and Cooperation in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Panama, to make a statement. COVID-19 has killed about 1 million people around the world, and that number threatens to double the number of fatalities until it's brought under control. It has been frightful, and it's still not over yet, and we have all suffered. Now, let's think for a moment about the ravages of COVID-19 exponentially increased 1,000 times. Let's think about a small nuclear exchange between two countries which could lead to a tragic nuclear winter that might lead to, just in a few minutes, the loss of life of 1 billion people without any option for mitigation. The contrast between these two tragic situations for mankind is in the difference with the pandemic. The only way to detain the nefarious consequences that result from nuclear weapons use, and the only way to do that is through countries cooperating and the great powers of the planet cooperating to prevent these from happening. The pandemic takes time to happen, but for nuclear weapons, it just takes a few seconds to press a button. There is only one solution, which is prevention. The commitment needs to be serious and real to eliminate the possession and manufacturing of nuclear weapons of all countries. It's the only way to protect ourselves from a massive catastrophe. Panama, as part of the Latin American and Caribbean region, was part of the development of a regional treaty for the eradication of nuclear weapons. It's the first treaty in this area which is regional in scope. This treaty has served as a model to be replicated by other regions successfully. And do you know what? It was not easy. The text was not perfect. There were many disagreements about membership and implementation. Many countries delayed their accession, but here we are. The treaty is working, and the Latin American and Caribbean region is committed to the prohibition of nuclear weapons. COVID-19 and the havoc it wreaks has helped us to see the idea that what impacts someone on the furthest corner of the planet also impacts us. And this can be the outbreak of a contagious virus, or it could also be the outbreak of the contagious blight of violence. We are all connected, and one cannot be impacted without affecting all. The pandemics have, throughout history, forced us to break with the past and build a new future. Let us take this opportunity to create awareness about the scope of the risk, the size of the risk, and let's support efforts to create a commitment by one and all for disarmament and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. This is the only solution given the most serious and devastating risk to which we are all exposed. Thank you.
I thank the Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs and Cooperation, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Nepal, for the statement. Sorry. I thank the Vice Minister of Multilateral Affairs and Cooperation of Panama. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Sedat Önal, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, to make a statement.
Mr. President, 75 years ago, nuclear weapons brought destruction to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Since then, elimination of nuclear weapons has been the highest disarmament priority. As it stands, the international security faces serious challenges. Nuclear disarmament seems elusive. We should return to a path leading to the total elimination of nuclear weapons. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown once again international problems can only be effectively tackled through international cooperation. Multilateralism is the best device to find common solutions. Disarmament is one of the main pillars in this effort. Turkey fully shares the goal of total elimination of nuclear weapons. Yet we recognize that there is no easy path to a nuclear weapons-free world. We must advance towards that goal through practical steps, consensus, and with active participation of nuclear as well as non-nuclear states alike. In this respect, we are committed to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. This treaty is the cornerstone of global nuclear non-proliferation regime and constitutes the basis for the development of nuclear technology for peaceful purposes. We hope the review conference of NPT will be convened soon and yield tangible outcomes. Turkey supports the widespread global call for legally binding prohibition of nuclear tests. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty has yet to enter into force. We urge all states that have not yet signed or ratified the treaty to do so as soon as possible. Our objective for a world free of nuclear weapons remains unchanged. Turkey will continue to be an active supporter and contributor of disarmament efforts. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Harshvardhan Shringla, Foreign Secretary of India, to make a statement.
Mr. President, India is pleased to participate in the high-level plenary meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. India reiterates its long-standing and unwavering commitment to universal, verifiable, and non-discriminatory nuclear disarmament, leading to the complete elimination of nuclear weapons, in line with the final document of the first special session of the UN General Assembly on Disarmament. Mr. President, India's approach to nuclear disarmament is encapsulated in our working paper submitted to the UNGA First Committee in 2006 and to the Conference on Disarmament in 2007. We believe that nuclear disarmament can be achieved through a step-by-step process underwritten by universal commitment and an agreed multilateral framework. India remains convinced of the need for meaningful dialogue among all states possessing nuclear weapons for building trust and confidence. India's annual resolution in the UNGA on the Convention on the Prohibition of the Use of Nuclear Weapons, tabled since 1982, enjoys wide support and reaffirms that any use of nuclear weapons would be a violation of the UN Charter and a crime against humanity. Mindful of the catastrophic consequences of unintended or accidental use of nuclear weapons, India has since 1998 tabled an annual resolution in the UNGA on reducing nuclear danger that calls for immediate and urgent steps to reduce the risks of unintentional and accidental use of nuclear weapons, including through de-alerting and de-targeting. Mr. President, India accords high priority to the Conference on Disarmament as the world's single multilateral disarmament negotiating forum and supports the commencement of negotiations on a comprehensive nuclear weapons convention at the CD. Without prejudice to the priority attached to nuclear disarmament, India remains to the immediate commencement of negotiations on a fissile material cutoff treaty in the CD on the basis of CD/1299 and the mandate contained therein. India espouses the policy of no first use against nuclear weapon states and non-use against non-nuclear weapon states. India is a key partner in global efforts towards disarmament and strengthening the non-proliferation order. Mr. President, we hope that this event today would bring further focus on the international community on the need to mobilize global will towards a nuclear weapons-free world. Mahatma Gandhi, whose birth anniversary we celebrate today, had said, and I quote, "Whatever you do will be insignificant, but it is very important that you do it," unquote. It is in this spirit that India is ready to work with other states towards the achievement of the noble goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
I thank the Foreign Secretary of India for his statement. I now have the honor to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Borit Auch, Vice Minister of Cambodia, to make a statement.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Cambodia is honored to take part in this important high-level plenary to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. This day was established by the United Nations to remind the global community of the need to work together in unity and with focused commitment to eradicating the ever-present threat of nuclear weapons worldwide for a safer world free of nuclear weapons. Today, on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, the purpose and objective of this commemorative date is ever important. Given the immense destruction and the capability to destroy humanity and eradicate the very existence of our modern legacies many times over, there is no justification, however rational, that should be utilized to legitimate this destruction force. The international community must adopt zero tolerance for nuclear weapons and call for mutual elimination of the nuclear capabilities. Mr. President, over the year, the global community has established several legal frameworks which can aid in the achievement of a more peaceful world. Chief among them is the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT. This year, the NPT celebrated its 50th anniversary since entering into force in 1970s, and although the 20th Review Conference of the party to the treaty was postponed due to the COVID-19, my delegation look forward to the conference effective resumption, and we hope that it will result in a consensus outcome. In this light, Cambodia called on nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states to actively engage in meaningful dialogue, reaffirmed by political will, and focus on achieving the ultimate goal of the NPT. For its part, Cambodia is committed to global nuclear disarmament as a priority. Article 54 of our Constitution stated that the manufacturing, use, and storage of nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons shall be absolutely prohibited in Cambodia. With this in mind, Cambodia signed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and is now actively engaged in ratifying and implementing the treaty in our country. Cambodia have worked diligently with our ASEAN member states to ensure that Southeast Asia remains a nuclear weapon-free zone. And I would like to emphasize the importance of engaging nuclear weapon states, the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, to sign the protocol to the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty. Mr. President, the existence of nuclear weapon states in direct contradiction to the objective of the United Nations Charter, which call on the global community to safeguard international peace and security while promoting development. Yet, the existence of nuclear weapons threatens humanity and the planet as a whole. Cambodia reaffirmed its commitment to global nuclear disarmament and call on all states to come together and through multilateral negotiation and compromise to ensure total elimination of nuclear weapons. Thank you.
I thank the Vice Minister of Cambodia for his statement. Before giving the floor to the next speaker, I will have to make an announcement. We will adjourn at 6 p.m. sharp, including the closing segment. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cameroon on behalf of the African Group to make a statement from the national seat.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the African Group. The group associates itself with the statement of the non-aligned movement. I wish to make the following remarks. Mr. President, the total elimination of nuclear weapons remains the only absolute guarantee against their use or threat of use. In this context, the group reiterates the urgent need for our planet to be free of nuclear weapons, as their presence constitutes a grave threat to global peace and security and an existential threat to humanity. Africa supports the principle of complete nuclear disarmament as the utmost prerequisite for maintaining international peace and security. It is in this spirit that the African Group welcomes the adoption of the landmark Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons on 7 July 2017. The African Group stressed that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons does not undermine the NPT, but rather complement and strengthen the nuclear non-proliferation regime with the NTP as its foundation. The group calls on all member states, especially the nuclear weapon states and those under the so-called nuclear umbrella, to seize this opportunity and pursue the goal of a nuclear-free world by signing and ratifying this important treaty. Mr. President, for the African Group, the highest priority for the United Nations should remain nuclear disarmament and achieving the total elimination of nuclear weapons, which is the overall objective of the NPT. The group reiterates its deep concern over the slow pace of progress by the nuclear weapon state to accomplish the total elimination of their nuclear arsenals in accordance with their legal obligation and undertakings under Article 6 of the NPT and the various relevant agreed outcomes of the NPT Review Conference. The group therefore insists on the implementation of all agreed measures undertaken by the nuclear weapon state in the context of the treaty. The group reaffirms the contribution on nuclear weapon-free zone across the world to the overall objective of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They represent a significant milestone towards achieving nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation objectives, thereby enhancing global and regional peace and security. In this context, the African Group reiterates its commitment to the Treaty of Pelindaba, which reaffirms the status of Africa as a nuclear weapon-free zone and as a shield for the African territory, including by preventing the stationing of nuclear explosive devices on the continent and prohibiting testing of those weapons on the African continent. Mr. President, the African Group reiterates its deep concern regarding the lack of implementation of the commitment and obligation of the 1995 NPT Review Conference resolution in the Middle East regarding the establishment of a zone free of nuclear weapons and all other weapons of mass destruction. The group strongly welcomes the convening of the first session of the Conference of the Establishment of a Zone Free of Nuclear Weapons and Other Weapons of Mass Destruction in the Middle East under the auspices of the United Nations, pursuing a General Assembly Decision 73/546 to negotiate a legally binding treaty on the establishment of the nuclear-free zone. The group also welcomed the successful outcome of the session as reflected in the report of the UN Secretary General contained in document A/75/63. The group calls on all states and organizations invited to the conference to actively participate in this conference in good faith as a practical step toward implementing the 1995 resolution on the Middle East and creating equitable, sustainable, and non-discriminatory security architecture in the region. The group further stressed that the 1995 resolution on the Middle East remains an integral and essential part of the package and the basis upon which consensus were reached on the indefinite extension of the NPT. The group wished to highlight the validity of these commitments and obligations until their full implementation. Mr. President, the African Group reiterates its regret that the non-NPT Review Conference was unable to agree on the final outcome document, despite the concerted effort of non-nuclear weapon states, particularly from Africa. As we prepare for the 10th NPT Review Conference, the group calls on all states to work towards the actualization of the goals and objectives of the treaty, as well as the previously agreed outcomes of its review conference, including achieving its universality. The group underscores the importance of the continued respect of the inalienable right to peaceful use of nuclear energy and stress the central role of the International Atomic Energy Agency in this regard through technical support and cooperation, as well as maximizing the use of science and technology for socio-economic development. Mr. President, the African Group wishes to emphasize humanitarian consideration in the context of all deliberation on nuclear disarmament, particularly its serious concern for the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of the use of or detonation of nuclear weapons, either by accident or as a deliberate action. The group calls on all states, particularly nuclear weapon states, to take into consideration the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of the use of these weapons on human health, the environment, and with economic resources, among others, and to take necessary measures aimed at dismantling and renunciation of these weapons. The group wishes to reiterate the importance of achieving universal adherence to the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, taking into consideration the special responsibility of nuclear weapon states. The group believes that the CABT offer hope of halting further development or proliferation of nuclear weapons, thereby contributing to the goal of nuclear disarmament. The group acknowledges the overwhelming support of the international community in promoting the entry into force of the CABT and calls on nuclear weapon states and those yet to accede to the NPT, which are listed in Annex 2 of the treaty and have not yet signed or ratified the CBT to do so without further delay. Mr. President, while reaffirming the importance of the work entrusted to the Conference of Disarmament, the group expressed its concern at the many years of impasses which has prevented the CD from fulfilling its mandate as the world's single multilateral disarmament negotiating forum. The group, therefore, calls on the CD to resume substantive work, taking into account the security interests of all states and without further delay. Finishing, Mr. President, the African group underscored the importance of the commemoration of the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons as an integral part of the multilateral disarmament effort. The African group looks forward to the actualization of the goal and objective of a nuclear weapon-free world. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Cameroon on behalf of the African Group for his statement. I now give the floor as the last speaker to the distinguished representative of Egypt on behalf of the Group of Arab States to make a statement from the national seat.
شكرا جزيلا سيد رئيس الجمعية العامة.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my pleasure to deliver the statement on behalf of the Arab Group on the occasion of the International Day of the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. We align ourselves with the NAM. This is a significant event highlighting the desire and commitment of the international community and the United Nations to eliminating these inhumane weapons which pose an existential threat to humanity, cause grave environmental and economic damages, and threaten international peace and security. The Arab Group stresses that we should deal comprehensively with weapons of mass destruction in line with other measures. The full elimination of such weapons should be irreversible because this is the only guarantee for humanity. In this context, we express our full concern regarding the existential threat posed by their continued possession, and because states continue to develop their nuclear arsenals and increasing the role of nuclear weapons in their military doctrines and strategies. The Arab Group stresses that the total elimination of these weapons represents the main guarantee against their use or threat of use by state or non-state actors. The achievement of this agreed objective depends on the nuclear states' implementation of their obligations under Article 6 of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and of the commitments agreed upon in previous NPT review conferences, including the achievement of the universality of this treaty, which is an important pillar for international security and the cornerstone of disarmament and non-proliferation. Mr. President, the continued existence of nuclear weapons and the lack of implementation of Article 6 of the NPT and the relevant binding commitments, which had been adopted at several sessions of the NPT review conference on achieving its universality, constitute a serious threat to international peace and security. We categorically reject the arguments according to which the possession of nuclear weapons is necessary to achieve international stability, or according to which the international environment is not conducive to moving forward with the implementation of nuclear disarmament obligations. The current circumstances, including the spread of COVID-19, are perhaps a significant demonstration of what the world could have achieved in terms of economic and social development and upgrading healthcare and pandemic prevention systems had the enormous resources allocated to nuclear armament programs and arms races been directed towards rational and useful purposes instead of being wasted in this manner. We call on nuclear states once again to assume their responsibilities in implementing the agreed objectives and commitments and disposing of their nuclear arsenals according to a specific timetable. We also demand that the so-called nuclear umbrella states revise their position and abandon the option of nuclear deterrence and nuclear sharing policies to preserve the credibility of their standpoints in terms of disarmament, maintenance of international peace and security, and achievement of sustainable development. We recall the significance of the CTBT in strengthening the nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation regime and the special responsibility of nuclear states and states which have not joined the NPT to expedite the entry into force of the CTBT. We wish to recall that in 2017, the world witnessed an unprecedented development. We reached a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons. In addition to the legal obligations of the parties thereto, it establishes a new customary source for the international law regulating disarmament. It places nuclear weapons in their logical position as weapons whose possession, use, or even threat of use conflict with the most basic principles of international humanitarian law, in addition to being a direct threat to international peace and security. Mr. President, in spite of the tensions and instability marking the Middle East, the Arab states have proven their good intentions through joining the NPT and implementing their respective obligations. Nevertheless, the Middle East remains one of the most prominent examples of the challenges facing the non-proliferation regime due to the failure to achieve the universality of the treaty and Israel's insistence on challenging the will of the international community. Israel refuses to implement the relevant international resolutions and to comply with the norms and rules established by the NPT, while some international powers continue to turn a blind eye to the situation and provide a political umbrella for Israel's positions. We stress the need for intensifying efforts to address this defect in our region through the implementation of agreed commitments, foremost among which the establishment of a zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, in accordance with the relevant resolution of the Review and Extension Conference of the NPT in 1995, Security Council Resolutions 487 and 679, and other resolutions adopted by UN General Assembly and the General Conference of the International Atomic Energy Agency in this regard. We stress the importance of the conference held by the UN under the GA's decision on the establishment of a zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. The group welcomes the success of the first session of the conference, which was held under the presidency of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan in November 2019, in reaching a number of significant results as contained in the Secretary General's report A/75/63. We urge all parties invited to the conference to participate in it in good faith to negotiate a binding treaty in this regard. This would contribute to the promotion of peace and security at the regional and international levels. The results of the first session, the success of the first session, as noted by all observers, have proven the feasibility of this key initiative and the ability of the states of the region, with the participation of the states invited as observers, to engage in a serious and meaningful dialogue on the establishment of a stable security regime through the elimination of nuclear weapons and other WMDs and confidence building. Mr. President, in conclusion, as we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the entry into force of the NPT and the 75th anniversary of the use of nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Arab group looks forward to tangible and practical steps towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons, including working to ensure the success of the 10th Review Conference of the NPT in reaching a comprehensive and balanced final document, supporting efforts to establish more nuclear weapon-free zones, particularly in the Middle East. Thank you very much, Mr. President. We will submit our text to the Secretariat. Thank you.
We have heard the last speaker for the high-level meeting of the plenary to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. Due to time constraints, the meeting was unable to hear from all scheduled speakers. All pre-recorded statements that have been submitted to the Secretariat are posted on webcast and will be available on demand on Web TV UN.org and be embedded as well on the observance page for the International Day. All statements submitted to statements will be uploaded online. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all participants for their invaluable insights and contributions to today's meeting. As conclusion, I would now like to make my final remarks from the rostrum. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all, the heads of state and government, the leaders of civil society, and all participants for your participation at this event to commemorate the International Day for Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons, and for demonstrating your continued dedication to our shared goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. This day provides an occasion for the global community to reaffirm our commitment to global nuclear disarmament as a priority. It reminds us all of the urgency of nuclear disarmament. It reminds us that the weapons that killed hundreds of thousands of people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki are still readily available to the use of some states. And it reminds us that there are terror organizations who are after these weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations is a critical partner on nuclear disarmament. Given its universal membership and its long experience in grappling with nuclear disarmament issues, amid growing divisions and rifts in the multilateral disarmament architecture, much work remains to be done. It is imperative that every member state act without delay in fulfilling their disarmament and non-proliferation commitments. By acting together, we can achieve our shared goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you very much. The meeting is now concluded. Before adjourning the meeting, I would like to remind members of the mitigation measures, especially the physical distancing requirements and around the hall. The meeting is adjourned.
Distinguished delegates, for social distancing purposes, I would now kindly request delegates to depart the hall in the following order. First row from Iceland to Italy. Next, from Jamaica to Latvia to leave one by one.